Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here, and welcome to my review of the Focal Celestee, which is a wonderful headphone that I feel like it flies under the radar for a lot of audiophiles. And in this review, in less than 10 minutes, because I'm going to try to keep my reviews briefer, I'm going to talk about what this sounds like, what this looks like, and I'm going to draw some comparisons to the Focal Stellia, which I have here, which I used to own, but then I sold. I'll talk about why I sold this, and I'll talk about how the Focal Celestee compares to the ZMF Verite Close, which is another headphone that I bought with my own money, and I still have it, and I'll most likely keep it for a while. So more on that later. So yeah, this is a nice looking headphone. I'm not going to talk too much about its looks. It's pretty evident. It's standard Focal fare. It doesn't have a comfort strap. It's a single headband system, but it's plush so that you don't get hot spots. I don't get hot spots. This is leather and it's quite comfortable, the ear pads. It looks nice. This, I feel like it's a pretty classy aesthetic. It's a pretty eye-catching aesthetic, but it's not as eye-catching as the Stellia, which is one of the reasons why I sold the Stellia, because I feel like I was getting way too many stares in the office with this, which wasn't ideal. And even in the coffee place, at first it was flattering when I was wearing this and people would come up to me and ask me what this was and how expensive this was. However, that wasn't in the long run very interesting or fun for me. But this, I think, flies under the radar just enough. It's still very attractive to the eye, which might matter to you. Now, construction-wise, it's, again, standard Focal fare. It hasn't had many issues of driver failure, or any for that matter that I know of. They have the sort of aluminum, magnesium drivers, 40 mm, I think. And yeah, it's comfortable. It's not very heavy. Focal knows how to sort of construct headphones, honestly. And you have the sort of French design flair going on with every headphone that they have, so that's that. Now, to jump into sound, I think the TLDR for the sound of the Focal Celestee is that it's a pretty inoffensive, warm-ish sound. I'll break down what I mean by that, in terms of how I sort of hear the frequency response, not just in relation to what the graphs look like. So in terms of how I hear this frequency response, the bass, I think, is a standout affair on this headphone, because the bass, to my mind, is the most balanced bass that I've heard on a Focal headphone. That is saying a lot, because a lot of Focal headphones are well known for their bass. But guys, this has the best bass. Not in terms of bass quality necessarily, but in terms of the frequency response. So I'll explain what I mean. So first of all, you have sub bass, and the sub bass there's no roll off. It's well extended, so it's less rolled off than the Focal Clear. It's less rolled off than the Focal Utopia. So that takes care of the high-end flagships, higher-end flagships, open backs. Now, in terms of this comparison to the, in terms of the bass compared to the Focal Stellia's bass, the Stellia, I think, has more mid bass and sub bass, significantly more. So the balance between mid bass and sub bass, because in the Stellia's case, is so much in the favor of mid bass that I feel like sub bass can get ground out. Does not happen here. The sub bass is articulate, it's nimble, it's deep, it growls, it's just wonderful, it's thick. And then there is mid bass, which adds a certain warmth to the overall sound and just balances out the bass, so you get a very nice succulent bass. I love the bass here, guys. And then it comes down at the appropriate point, so there is no ostensible or perceptible bleed into the mid-range. Mid-range then has pinna gain. It tracks Harman, but honestly, it's not as shouty as Harman. And if you've watched my reviews, I've called the Harman 3K shouty before. What happens with Harman is that from 2K to 5K, you have a big hump, which is supposed to be a compensation for how our ears hear this, etc. But Harman, honestly, is like based on a perception survey, right? So, and surveys are what they are when we talk about people's perceptions. So maybe a lot of people like that sort of, hump from 2K to 5K. I don't. I think that's shouty. And on certain headphones, it can be shoutier than on other headphones. On certain IEMs, Harman is shoutier and thinner. It really depends on a lot of things, right? However, with the Celestee, all the way tracks Harman, and you get a pinna gain, you get elevation all the way up to 3K. It's not as filled out from 3K to 5K. So I feel like it's less shouty than Harman. It's slightly more relaxed in the upper mids, which is perfect. Honestly, I love the upper mids here. It's forward enough without being in your face. So it's not LCD5 forward, but it's still forward enough that you hear vocals separate from the mix, and it sounds nice. It feels great. The vocals, Focal vocals. In any case, treble, lower treble is a bit rolled off, even in relation to Harman. So basically, what happens is, all the way up until air frequencies, it sort of tracks Harman, but never supersedes Harman, if you know what I mean. So. However, I do want to say that Focal headphones, even if they, in terms of how they graph, even if it looks like it's not as energetic as Harman, even if it looks like it's not as filled out as Harman, they still have a certain quality of aggression and sharpness, which is nice. So I do feel like to tune a focal headphone well, you do need it to be slightly lower in treble energy than the Harman Target, which this does effectively. So honestly, guys, I've been basing this off Harman, which is a useful reference, of course. I just don't want people to get too carried away about it being a gold standard target that everyone must adhere to, because honestly, a lot of people, and rightfully, and a lot of headphone manufacturers will claim, and I agree with them, that Harman perhaps has too much of a sub-bass emphasis without enough mid-bass, and Harman perhaps has too much of an upper mid emphasis, which doesn't work, and Harman perhaps even has too little of air frequency emphasis. So these are my criticisms of the Harman curve. More on that later. Maybe I'll write a paper at some point on this, but for now, the Celestee it tracks Harman. So one could say if neutral is basically what you associate with Harman, it's fairly neutral, but it's warmer than that because of its lower levels of lower treble energy compared to Harman, and because it's higher levels of mid-bass energy compared to Harman. So it's a warmish take on Harman. I love the tonality here, guys. Technical performance. Now, it's fairly resolving. I think it's close to the focal clears, but not exactly the focal clear level resolution. I will talk about all the focal headphones in a separate video, I think, because I have all of them with me, at least the top of the line ones. And resolution is, of course, shy of the Stellia. The Stellia is supremely resolving, guys. So it's pretty clear if you A/B between the Celestee and the Stellia, you notice a greater sense of clarity, a greater clarity of images, more information from tracks on the Stellia. So the Stellia does live up to its $3,000 price tag insofar as, you know, the jump up from resolution goes. Of course, it's not like 3 times more resolving. It's perhaps 25% more resolving. I don't know. But it's not as resolving as the Stellia, of course, and it's slightly more resolving than the Radiance, which I've also owned in the past. Now, in terms of its soundstage width, it's not as wide as the focal clear, which you wouldn't expect because it's a closed bag, but it's not a huge difference because the clear doesn't have a wide soundstage. But where I think it actually sort of is noticeable in terms of its performance and stage and how it, let's say, lags that of the Stellia or the clear is that the Celestee does not have the soundstage sort of layering ability, the imaging layering ability that a lot of the higher end focals do. Do you notice it? Is it a deal breaker? You do not notice it if you're not ABing, and it's not a deal breaker. It sounds like a fairly natural headphone in terms of how headphones present or can present images. So it's a far better, of course, than any commercial headphone that you've heard that's a closed bag, because you do get a sense of image distinction and clarity that you wouldn't get like even from an AirPods Max, of course. However, only when comparing to a Stellia or a focal clear, you might get a sense of greater image clarity and precision and layering on the Stellia and the clear. So that's for soundstage. It's not the final word on soundstage, but it's really not bad, guys. It's fair. It's more than, you know, decent, I feel, for a closed bag. And honestly, I do want to say that with a lot of these high-end closed bags, including the Celestee, you could zone out to music and not feel like you're listening to a closed bag. And that happens to me. That happened to me even today. So I don't want to overemphasize the lack of soundstage width on the Celestee. I think it's fine for an audiophile headphone at this price point. Timbre, focal gets slogged for. Focal gets flogged, slogged, call it what you will, and focal gets criticized for its timbre, and perhaps rightly so. There are frequency response related quirks some focal headphones have, like little peaks in around 1K, creating a sense of honk, and then, you know, jaggedy treble in around low to mid treble, etc., which can create a sense of treble roughness and metallicness. However, these things have a flip side that I want to talk about in a later video, where focal headphones, I think, because of their slightly more metallic timbre, can actually reproduce certain sounds really well. For example, sounds of drums I've enjoyed on focal headphones far more than I think on any other headphone. I'll give you an example. The Abyss 1266 Phi TC, a legendary $6,000 headphone, which a lot of people love for its bass, certainly has way more bass punch and impact than any focal headphone, I think. However, in terms of its decay and realism, I don't think anything can match focal dynamic drivers, and to some extent ZMF dynamic drivers. So focal headphones timbrally it's not an open and shut case. For certain instruments, I think the timbre is fabulous, class leading. But let's say for certain other instruments like vocals and I think strings to some extent, I prefer, let's say, a high feminine Susvara and many other high feminine headphones, honestly, and certainly ZMF headphones for vocals and strings. I think for vocals and strings, timbrally, ZMF headphones are here. and perhaps focal headphones are slightly below. But for modern genres, and if you listen to a lot of techno or EDM, etc., these things will sound very real. So that's timbre. And finally, dynamics and speed. It's a fast headphone, not as fast, not nearly as fast as the focal Stellia, but you know, I only say it's not nearly as fast because it's perceptible, but if you did not have a Stellia at hand to compare, you'd be pretty satisfied with the speed. It's not a slow or sluggish headphone. It works well. It's dynamic, of course. All focal headphones have this dynamism and punch and slam quality, which this does in Grove, so it's wonderful for that. Honestly, guys, because it's a punchy headphone and because focal headphones have a tendency towards aggression, I want to say that this is well tuned because it is slightly warmer than most focal headphones. So I have crossed the 10-minute mark, which I wanted to end this review in 10 minutes. That's not happening. I'm going to now try to target it to finish this in 12 minutes. So one more comparison, the ZMF Verite Closed, which is something I bought with my own money. Love this headphone. It's a closed back. How does it compare? It's warmer than the focal Celestee. It's even warmer. It's noticeably warmer. I think the Celestee is basically a warm take on Harman, which I think is more natural sounding, even if you consider Harman neutral. So natural and neutral might not be the same thing. At least I don't think they are. However, this is warmer than the Celestee. It's something that I would call a warm headphone. This does better vocals. Vocals are magnificent here, but if you didn't A/B this with the Celestee, you might think the Celestee is good enough for vocals, and it's very good for vocals. However, the Verite Closed is just class leading for vocals, and overall, I do think it also lacks just a little bit of clarity if you drive it with normal gears. If you have to do justice to a ZMF Verite Closed, like I have talked about in the past, you would need a high impedance OTL because that just brings out the technical performance potential of a Verite Closed and most high impedance ZMF headphones. Not so much with this. This you can drive off anything. Of course, it does, you know, scale and perform better with higher quality gears, but it's pretty easy to drive, guys. So that's it, guys. Who is this for? This is what I think is interesting. This is for everyone. This could be the people's closed back. This is just a wonderful people's closed back headphone. Works with all genres. Works with everything, guys. And so another reason why I sold the Stellia, I thought was, you know, so I mentioned how it's too blingy. I also didn't want to carry around a $3,000 headphone in a coffee place or to my office. I feel slightly more secure with a Celestee because it's significantly less expensive at around $990. So I'm more comfortable carrying this around in case it breaks or something happens to this. And last but not the least, I like the bass on the Celestee more than on the Stellia. And I like the tuning of the Celestee more on the Stellia. So with those parting words, guys, check it out. Wonderful headphone. I hope this review was useful. If this was, give it a like. If you like my work in general, subscribe to my channel. I'll have a lot of more interesting videos coming up. And I'll see you in my next one. Bye-bye.